Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Light for your approval.
Another dimension.
Light for your
Shadow. Another dimension.
light for your
Shadow. Another dimension. Self.
light for your
Shadow. Another Twilight Zone.
submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Hello, and welcome to a hiatus episode of It's Time to Rewind, a podcast where I take a look at time loop TV shows and movies, one loop at a time. And this time, after finishing up with the Twilight Zone season, I'm looking at other horror and sci-fi anthology shows. But I am kicking things off here with another episode from the 80s Twilight Zone reboot. And here with me is Jim O'Kane from The Rocketeer Minute. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me on. It's this is an interesting concept of going through time loop movies and TV shows and things. And this getting into, I think, an almost forgotten series. I think the 80s Twilight Zone is kind of overlooked, but there's a lot of great episodes, many of which are chopped up and put on YouTube, so they're available to the general public.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that, you know, with the Jordan Peele rebooted series for CBS All Access, which is now Paramount Plus, they actually consolidated their Twilight Zone access. It used to be available on Netflix and Hulu, and they just recently took it off of Hulu, and I think they took it off of Netflix a while ago. And so now the classic Twilight Zone is only available on Paramount Plus, and along with the new season, but they don't have the 80s or the 2000s series on there.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the licensing arrangement was. I had a feeling that Cayuga Productions, who owned Twilight Zone, cut a separate deal for those, and it's kind of isolated from CBS Viacom, or now Paramount CBS Viacom. But it's a shame too, because there really are a lot of great stories well told in the 80s Twilight Zone series. And the one we're going to be talking about in this episode is probably my favorite. I think this is really great writing, fantastic cast, and ably directed by the director John Hancock, who made some kind of forgotten but great films like Bang the Drum Slowly. So, I think we're going to have a good time chatting about a bunch of different elements of this episode.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of interesting concepts in here, and while it's not exactly a time loop, it does have some time travel elements in it, and it's almost like you could almost say that it's like a closed loop, where it's, you know, just one single loop for some of the characters, but I don't know, that might be a stretch, but
yeah, maybe it's kind of an open, I'd say a half hitch, maybe not a loop, but some kind of a quite knot tie. There's a type of knot called a bosun's knot that you tie a knot, but you put a stick in where the loop is, and if you pull the stick out, the loop becomes undone. And a bosun's hitch. So I'm thinking this is kind of a bosun's hitch episode, if not a true loop.
Yeah.
Maybe
I can see that.
Maybe we should get into a little bit about the general, for folks who haven't seen the episode. This is the title is Profile in Silver, and it concerns the Kennedy assassination and what effect time travelers would have on the Kennedy assassination, and the idea that time doesn't like to be messed with. Mm-hmm. So I guess we have, if you're listening to this, there's spoilers ahead. So if you're, I'd say if you're
for all both of the people that are interested in watching the 80s Twilight Zone and haven't watched it yet.
Yeah, it's it's very similar, and this was written before Stephen King came out with his novel 11/22/63, but it's very similar to what would happen if you knew that JFK was getting assassinated on November 22nd, and what would happen if you stopped it. So we pick up the story, I think 150 years in the future, and or actually the story begins in 1963, but we find out that one of the major characters in it, a Joseph. Oh, by the way, if you're supposed to describe the story and I'm not, let me know. I don't want to.
No, you go right ahead. I watched it once, and you mentioned that this is one of your favorite episodes of it, so I'll just jump in with my thoughts. You go right ahead.
Okay, well, the basic plot is there's a time traveler. His name is Joseph Fitzgerald, and we find him on November the 22nd, the morning of November 22nd.
Yeah, and he's played by Lane Smith.
Lane Smith.
And I think he's most well known for Lois and Clark. He played Perry White, and that's definitely where I knew him from, because I was a big fan of that series.
Yeah, I think of him in that, and also in the HBO series From the Earth to the Moon. He was the kind of a fictional Walter Cronkite character in there. And he does one of the worst Boston accents I've ever heard, considering that Lane Smith is from Memphis, Tennessee. I admire him for his effort.
Yeah, I definitely felt that a few times during the episode, his more standard Texan, the same accent that he used for Perry White, slip in here and there.
Yeah, it wasn't a good fit, but he is a great actor and a very enjoyable and instantly likable character, whoever he plays. But Lane Smith is posing as a Harvard professor, Joseph Fitzgerald, who is on a research mission to find out what was going on in the 1960s in politics and history. And there are apparently many time-traveling observers that were sent back in time to look at different critical events in history. So he's teaching a class in history at Harvard, and the class finishes up, and he's about to go teleport himself to Dallas and watch the JFK get assassinated.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because he mentions that he spent, I think it was about 3 years here in the past.
Yes, yeah. So he's obviously been there since, the Bay of Pigs, I guess since, basically since Kennedy's inauguration, which is remarkably similar to Stephen King's story that was written about 10 years later about a fellow that goes back in time to 1961 and then lives through 2 years to see if he could stop the Kennedy assassination. So
yeah, I've heard about that series, but I never got around to watching it.
Yeah, it's remarkably almost litigically similar. I would think that someone got paid for Stephen King's novel when it finally was released. But it's he's back there in time, and as he's there, he sets up a kind of a hollow projector. This woman shows up, played by Barbara Baxley, and she's a co-worker, a colleague of Joseph Fitzgerald, and she came to find out how he was doing. And so Joseph tells her that things are going good. He feels very bad about having to go see JFK be assassinated because he barely knew the man. So she said, well, this is just one of the problems of being an observer in history. And so she says her goodbye to him and says something cryptic in Chinese. He didn't quite catch it, but she disappears in a very 1980s video special effect.
Yeah, and I thought it was, again with the not like a bit of a stretch with the Lois and Clark reference. I thought that she looked very similar to Kay Callan, who played Martha Kent.
I agree. Yeah, she had the same voice and just the facial expressions were very similar. He has a special ring on that. It's a Harvard ring. And before he goes, when he was talking with her, he is playing with a 1964 Kennedy $50, which would be an anachronism in 1963, and is supposed to be forbidden for time travelers to take these kind of mementos with him. But he said it's overlooked. It's nothing important. Nobody's ever going to find out about it. Yeah,
he's like, everybody does it.
Yeah, it's okay. Don't worry about messing up the time loops and the time stream. So we have all these things set up in the exposition series. And he has this $50. He's back in time, and he really has an affinity for JFK. So he.
I think even right there he mentions that he's his JFK's ancestor.
That's right. Yeah, some kind of he's like great grandnephew or something. But he takes his ring and teleports to Dealey Plaza in Dallas, just as the motorcade is heading down. It's turning onto Houston into Elm Street, and he's there with a very special camera that is similar to the Zapruder camera. That it looks like an 8mm camera, but he's filming a holograph of the Lincoln the Lincoln Continental with the Kennedy entourage, and as he looks up to see Oswald in the Texas School Book Depository, he suddenly realizes that he can do something to change things, and he pushes through the crowd and yells at the president, "There's a gun, get down!" And so JFK and Jackie duck down in the car, and Oswald misses the shot, and here's our time traveler is now a hero. So he's changed all of history. That's the commercial break right there. Mm-hmm. And then we come back, and he's in a car that's loaded with Secret Service agent, and he's being followed by police cars. They're taking him back to Love Field so that he can meet the president. And we hear on the radio, we hear the actual speech that JFK was going to deliver when at the Trade Mart if he hadn't been assassinated. So we get to Love Field, and again we meet JFK up close, and it's Andrew Robinson, who older people would remember him as the bad guy in the original Dirty Harry movie. Most modern audiences would know him as Garrick, the tailor from Deep Space Nine.
Oh yeah.
And he's just a fantastic actor, and he has a much better JFK impression than Lane Smith's fake Bostonian English. But
I thought he did a pretty good job.
He really carried it off well.
Impression.
Yeah, and very, very likable guy. He seemed very. He really got the whole pensive JFK idea.
And he didn't overdo it, I think, either.
Yeah, it would be really easy to go Vaughn Meader or some kind of extreme.
Like Mayor Quimby from The Simpsons.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he didn't come off like Ted. He was just he sounded like JFK without being overdoing it. But he gets to Love Field, and JFK thanks him for saving his life and tells him, call me Jack. Yeah, people who save my life can call me Jack. We get a cameo by Jerry Hardin, who since we're on the Star Trek binge here with Deep Space Nine, if you watched the episode Time's Arrow from the Next Generation, Jerry Hardin played Mark Twain. He played Mark Twain, so he's got the Missouri Texas accents working for him pretty well. Most people might not know this, but he's the father of Melora Hardin, who was she plays. Oh my gosh, I just drew a blank. Steven, The Office. She played Jan on The Office, and her dad is Jerry Hardin. And anyway, Jerry has just about, I think he has 2 lines in this thing saying that there's tornadoes setting down in Austin and Dallas, and they're all over the state of Texas. So apparently there's something going wrong with the timeline. And Lane Smith gets asked back by JFK if he'd go back to the White House with the president and have dinner with him and with JFK and Jackie. So he accepts, and they head back to they head back to Washington. This time JFK is not in a coffin. So they get on the plane, and Joseph Fitzgerald is talking to JFK and asking him what he's thinking about. He says it's just very odd when somebody's trying to kill you. And he said he was in the war and people were shooting at him, but it wasn't personal. He goes, this one was aimed directly at me, so it's just kind of shocking to have that. We find out that more changes in the timeline have occurred, that Khrushchev was assassinated that day, and things look pretty ominous, like we're heading for World War III. As Joseph Fitzgerald is sitting in Air Force One thinking about all these things, he starts fiddling with the $50 in his pocket, and he drops it. And the Secret Service agent, who's played by Louis Giambalvo, who's been in a million things. I mean, he's been in everything from Barnaby Jones to just think of any television series from the 60s or 70s or 80s. He was a guest star in them. But the Secret Service agent picks up the coin and looks at it, and it says 1964, and doesn't give it back to Joseph Fitzgerald. They land at Andrews Air Force Base and head for the White House. And when they're in the White House, things start coming apart for Joseph Fitzgerald. They're trying to figure out the Secret Service agent shows the coin to JFK, and Kennedy tries to figure out if it's some kind of a dirty trick. Some kind of a counterfeit thing. And they said no, it's actually it comes up to the Mint standards, and he's trying to figure out if it's some kind of a campaign thing by the Republicans to give him problems in the '64 campaign. And he said, I don't know why anybody would spend that kind of money to come up with something this accurate, and risk jail time because it's a counterfeit $50. So as he's doing this, they call the professor in, and Joseph starts trying to figure out what to do as they're asking all these questions. JFK loses his temper and explains to him that he better start telling the truth. So Fitzgerald picks up the camera, the movie camera that the FBI hasn't been able to figure out how it opens or anything like that, and he turns it on and shows a holographic projection of the motorcade and explains that he was a time traveler, and he was there merely to observe. But none of these things that happened, like World War III about to break out, were supposed to happen. Kennedy suddenly figures out that he was supposed to die that day.
Yeah, I love that moment of this episode where he's portrayed as someone that's intelligent enough to figure it out, and there's not really much time spent on we don't believe you. This is another case which I just talked about this in the Jordan Peele episode Replay, which involved a time loop, and that actually had a similar situation where the mother was telling her son and her brother that she had this magic camera that could take her back in time, and both of them pretty much immediately believed her, and they did that in this as well, which I think a part of me appreciates the change, but I think it also is due to the fact that this is on a TV timetable, so they couldn't really waste a whole lot of time on them convincing them.
Yeah. Well, I think Andrew Robinson as JFK comes across very well, as just showing a slight change in his expression as the enormity of what this change in time meant and what it meant for him that he was, supposed to die that day. I think that just the look on his face as he figures it out, it's not horror. It's just more like the scale of what's happened, and asking how they can, what the conversation turns to is how can they fix this? And one thing I didn't mention was Lane Smith has a computer that's attached to his ring that tells what needs to be done. And they said the only thing that, if every scenario that comes out from that moment on to fix the timeline is that World War III has to break out and there has to be like global death of 87% of the planet.
Well, so, he was asking if this was a viable timeline first. And the computer was like, well, there's a 78% chance that they're just going to go to nuclear war now. There's a 12% chance that they won't go to nuclear war, but the Soviet Union will be economically destroyed, which will cause famine and result in global extinction in about 6 to 10 years from now. And then and he's like, so there's only 11% chance, and then his watch is like, no, the 11% chance also includes everyone dying.
Yeah. So it's like this is the end of the road. This is a dead end. You're in a cul-de-sac. It ain't gonna happen. You're gonna have to back out and do it again. So
the computer also mentioned that they already made an attempt that the Khrushchev assassination was an attempt to fix the timeline.
Yeah. That first was the tornadoes, then the Khrushchev assassination, and nothing worked. Nothing fixed anything. So they're in a world of hurt here, and so it's JFK, Fitzgerald, and the Secret Service agent trying to figure out what to do. And Fitzgerald finally comes up with an idea, but he doesn't exactly explain it to everybody. He takes his ring off and puts it on JFK. JFK assumes that he has to go back in time and die in Dealey Plaza so that the timeline is correct. But what that ring actually turns out to do something else, which we get to at the very end of the show. So what the
at this point we just see him disappear.
Right. Yeah, we just see him go away, so we think he's gone back in time. So we have the Lane Smith talks to the Secret Service agent, and he says, "You've sworn an oath to protect the president's life at all costs. So now I'm gonna hold you to that." And so what happens is he and the Secret Service agent go back in time to Dealey Plaza and that Friday afternoon, and instead of JFK appearing in the Lincoln, JFK is replaced by Lane Smith, Joseph Fitzgerald, and Joseph Fitzgerald gets shot by Oswald and dies in the arms of Jackie. So he gets taken to Parkland Hospital, where we meet his colleague, who is now disguised, the colleague from the future, who's now disguised as a Parkland Hospital doctor. And she takes the Secret Service agent aside and says that he has to, identify Lane Smith's body as that of JFK and keep this a secret, that it wasn't JFK that died there. And she said that she had known all along that this is the way time was going to play out, that Joseph Fitzgerald was going to die replacing JFK, but no observer is allowed to know their own end, so she couldn't tell him. And the thing that she had whispered to him was a saying in Chinese, which I did not write down, but it was
basically goodbye.
Yeah, farewell, my friend, that kind of a thing. Happy journeys or something. So we, with all this going on, we kind of forgot about JFK. Where did John Kennedy go? And we go back to the 22nd century Cambridge, and there at Harvard, the Harvard History Department, is someone speaking about how the important thing is that you give your life for your fellow man, and that there are people who are forgotten but should never be forgotten, that they're important in saving peace and prosperity for the universe, that kind of stuff. And it turns out that the new professor at Harvard of the 22nd century is President Kennedy, who's now Professor Kennedy, and that gets tied up in a neat little bow, and cue the credits, or cue the next segment of Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
But a great story, well told, I thought.
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty good episode. I liked how it handled their concept of time travel, and it's which it tends to be relatively common with this, is like basically the fatalistic view of time travel, in that if time travel does exist in the future, then it will have already, we would have already seen it, because it will have already happened, because time isn't really linear. Time is just a construct, so there's no such thing as a paradox, because anything that will have happened in the future will always happen that way in the future. And if they come back into the past, then it's already set to have happened. And right. So all of these events, they were already destined to happen, because they more or less already had happened.
Yeah, I was surprised at the quality of the story. I mean, considering the budget wasn't great, the biggest expenditure, I think, on this entire episode was the second unit shooting that they actually. I lived in Dallas at the time, or suburban Dallas at the time they were shooting this, and they actually paid to rope off Dealey Plaza for an afternoon. They got in a bunch of replica cars and things like that, and had a kind of a cattle call for everybody to show up in early 60s clothing if they wanted to be part of the crowd scene there. And the shots with Lane Smith and running, that's on a Hollywood backlot, but the actual crowd scenes were filmed in Dealey Plaza in Dallas. So that was kind of the biggest expense on this. But
I did notice that it seemed like it was very fakey, but I did appreciate. I feel like they were referencing the grassy knoll because he appeared like right behind a hedge.
Yeah, and it's there are no California style Pueblo homes in the background, which you can see when you're looking at Lane Smith there. But the actual scenes of Dealey Plaza are real. That's actually where it is in Dallas. They actually had to take down a few highway signs that had changed over the years, so they pulled some of the newer signs down so that it would look period. It's very impressive. I felt it was an entertaining script and well delivered, which at the mid 80s anthology shows like this, I keep thinking there were things, there was a writer's strike and things coming up in the following year and stuff, but they weren't very well produced, and the writing was kind of inferior. But this particular sequence of Twilight Zone was very good. There is, I don't know if somebody else is going to bring this up in a future episode. There's another Twilight Zone episode where an Elvis impersonator replaces Elvis. He accidentally kills Elvis in 1956 and takes on Elvis's career. And so the Elvis we've always known and loved was actually an Elvis impersonator who did his life.
Somebody did mention it earlier in the season. I had never seen that episode. I referenced the more current movie Yesterday.
Yes,
which has a similar concept with the Beatles.
Yeah, it's very clever. And the amazing thing I remember at the end of the episode was that it was done with permission of the Presley estate. So Priscilla signed off on it and said, "Yeah, this sounds like a good episode. Go ahead." But very, very clever as well. I'd like to see. Well, I mean, I know I've seen some of the Peele Twilight Zones, but I haven't been as impressed by the writing as I've seen in that 80s Twilight Zone episodes.
Yeah, I chose the two time loop episodes, and the thing that I appreciate about them is that a lot of stuff is kind of buried just under the surface, and I think both of them did hold up pretty well to dissecting them, and there was a lot of Easter eggs to the classic Twilight Zone series, especially in replay.
Yeah, and it's impressive that you don't need CGI to tell a good story. They're really, I mean, other than there's a couple of teleportations in this, but you don't really need special effects. You just need a compelling narrative, and I think this one has it in spades. It's really impressive for getting that quick. And I think it's like 25 minutes or so. It's a 25-minute segment of an hour-long show, but it's so very powerful and rewatchable too. I've watched this episode I don't know how many times since, but it's always entertaining.
So I am kind of curious. Did you were you a regular watcher of the 80s Twilight Zone whenever it came out, or did you come back to it later on?
I watched it when it was originally broadcast, and for the most part they were good. Some of them were, some of them you feel like filler episodes. So there were some where they, it's an hour-long show and they had one good episode that they started out with, and they had a second one that you could just kind of drift off. And I think
sometimes they had three shorts in there too.
Yeah, typically the shorter the better. I think they needed a very tight one. There's the coupled the other half of this hour of Twilight Zone is a very good one. It's an old story of people who get handed a box where they would be given $1 million if they pressed a button, but if they pressed the button, somebody they didn't know would die.
Oh yeah, I didn't know that that was from the Twilight Zone, but I knew of that as a thought experiment.
Yeah, and it's been done in several short stories, some variations of it, but it's clever and has a nice monkey's paw kind of twist at the end. So well worth watching as well. So if you're scanning YouTube and you happen to find I think it's season 1, episode 49. If you find that of the new 80s Twilight Zone, it's worth watching both episodes or both segments of that episode.
Yeah, I think I was just a little bit too young for the 80s Twilight Zone because I would have been 5 whenever it came out. I think it's possible that I watched maybe a couple episodes, maybe in the later seasons, but I don't really remember it. And I think whenever the 2000s series came out, it just didn't cross my radar at all.
Yeah, I mean that's the beauty of YouTube. There's always if you find some of these lost gems, they're often worth watching.
Yeah, I think I have gone back and watched a few of a mix of some of these episodes. I'm not sure if I hit the 80s or just the 2000s. I'm pretty sure I at least saw the remake of the After Hours with the mannequin. I kind of remember seeing that episode.
Yeah, they're all very good. I mean, it's a shame. I mean, due to so many different licensing and intellectual property rights, it's difficult to track down some entire series just because no one's allowed to broadcast it or stream it
I think there's a slightly similar situation with like the Tales from the Crypt, which that's one of my favorite horror sci-fi anthology shows because it's like it was fully released on DVD, but it's not streaming anywhere and like it's not on HBO Max.
Yeah. I've had that problem with one of the ones I enjoyed was the 1987 version of Mission Impossible. Peter Graves was in it, but they had a whole new other staff. It was during the writer's strike, so they filmed it and wrote it in Australia, and it was very clever. There were a lot of very clever plots, and it was interesting to see it with a new cast. Phil Morris, who was Greg Morris's son, played the son of Barney Phillips, who was one of the original Mission Impossible characters. So it was interesting seeing that, the next generation of IM Force people. But that's not available anywhere, and apparently it's just not worth fighting for to get it. It's in the other problems with some of these 80s shows is that they're in standard definition, and people aren't watching standard definition anymore. So it's hard to migrate. But there's always hope, and there's always going to be something new on somebody else will release something, or they're going to find out that there's money in it somewhere, and hopefully it'll show up on some platform somewhere.
Yeah, but it was I enjoyed watching this episode, and thank you for picking it out and talking with me about it today. And then for anybody else that's listening, why don't you go ahead and take a minute and share where they can find you online?
Well, as you mentioned, I hosted or was co-host of the Rocketeer Minute, so you can find that at wherever you're getting your podcasts. You can find them on Spotify or Apple Play or any of those, or Google Play or any of the other platforms. Also available at rocketeerminute.com. I'm also doing every year the Movies by Minutes community does a group project. This year in 2022, we're doing the 1985 Lawrence Kasdan directed feature, the Silverado. And Silverado Minute is the place to find it. We premiere that show on February 28th, 2022. So if you're listening to this after February 28th, just run over there and pick it up. It's also available on Spotify, TuneIn, all the other typical platforms. But we have 26. We have 26 groups of hosts each doing a week of shows. So it's a really good, like a Whitman sampler of Movies by Minute hosts doing things there. So if you can check that out, silveradominute.com. Yeah,
I considered signing up for it, but at the time I felt like I didn't have enough experience as a Movies by Minute host, and also like Western is my is the genre that I'm like the least familiar with, so I didn't think it was the right time for me to jump in on it, but I think I am probably likely to jump in on whatever next year's project might be.
Okay, we have some down to 3 different kinds. But I think everybody will like the ones that we've got up for next year. So I hope to see you on that one and hear your views on a movie that maybe you've never seen before, or maybe you've seen too many times. We'll find out.
And as always, I'm Bubba Wheat, and the rest I will continue coming out with hiatus episodes every week on Monday for the next month or two before I come out with the next season, which will be my recursion season, where I'm taking a look at 3 as I think of them as like recursive time loops, where it's actually a time loop very similar to the time travel in this, where the concept of time travel is fatalistic, where it's has already happened, and so it's revealed that and I guess spoiler alert for these movies, but they see things in the first loop, and then they find out that is them from a future time loop that had already come back in time, and then it's revealed in this way. And the 3 movies that I'm taking a look at that use that concept is Triangle, which I think is the most popular, the most well-known one, Time Crimes, and a more lesser-known one just called Time Loop. So that should be fun. And then I'm also starting another new podcast, which is not movie related. It's should be like it's a fun. Well, hopefully I haven't recorded it yet, but it's coming out this February every Friday. It's called Lyrical Innuendo, and it should be a fun show where I take a look at I dive into the lyrics of a song with a co-host. His name is Rob Branch, and we dissect this and discuss whether or not the song is about sex or not. So it should be a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to doing that. And this show is It's Time to Rewind, and you can find it on Anchor.fm as well as anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. And we also have a Facebook group, It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group that you can join. And then, and until next time, I will still be on hiatus.
Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension. Self.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.